Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. We are going to start now. We would like to thank everyone who found it possible to join us today. Well, actually, I understand this is the first discussion dedicated to the decision to create or set up the Ministry of Information Policy in Ukraine. My name is Andriy Simanskyi. I'll try to be a moderator, to moderate this discussion. With your permission, perhaps the fact that yesterday they passed a decision and actually and approved the composition of the government. I believe everybody is happy that we have a new government and we have another chance to demonstrate how it can work. I mean, how they can work, our new government members. At the same time, you all know that the issue of appointment of the new Minister of Information Policy brought about was a resounding event in the society, in the media community, those people who have something to do with the information. And actually, I believe that today it would be necessary for us to focus more on some practical consequences of the adopted decision, how they're going to stop this Ministry of Information Policy, what is the vision of its creation, of this ministry, how they visualize that. And I do hope that actually through a number of such discussions, perhaps we'll be able to involve the society and the public in order to find the proper and well-balanced decision regarding how this ministry could function. At the same time, we understand that there are a lot of different ideas. Did they really have to create such a ministry? And in Ukraine, a lot of people voiced their opinion against such a new ministry. At the same time, we believe and we believe that such a decision in Ukraine maybe bears some threat to the media freedom in Ukraine. But I do hope that we'll try to work here very constructively and again try to find out whether this is a real threat or a real problem, and whether we can actually, at this point of time, in the days of actual war, whether we'll have an opportunity to this way or another way to answer, to respond in our joint vision to those threats which we encounter in the immediate space. Nobody, I believe, doubts that the information policy as per se has to be in this or another country, but many of us actually have some doubts which specific manner it has to be formulated or coordinated or translated into life. With your permission, I would like to give the floor immediately to the newly appointed Minister of the Information Policy, Mr. Igor Stets, so that he could briefly present his understanding, his vision of the mandate which he plans to implement. And then we'll come back to the discussion. We have about an hour and 20 or 15 minutes, so I believe it will be enough for us to discuss everything. Yuriy, have the floor. Good afternoon. I believe that you have in your handouts the provisions of the ministry, regulations of the Minister of the Information Policy. I would like to ask Svitlana Zalischuk. Okay. Once again, I would like to emphasize that this is the draft provisions for the Ministry of Information Policy. I actually designed that in 2008, and a year later, I proposed that to the two factions in bloc of Yuriy Tymoshenko of the Parliament of the Sixth Convocation, with member of which I was myself. By that time, they actually had formed the coalition, and these draft provisions or draft regulations was suggested or was proposed to the then government and to the then coalition. Since that day, when we had such a discussion, more than 5 years elapsed, and unfortunately, why I say unfortunately, because I'm convinced that if we set up the Ministry of Information Policy in those days, perhaps we would not lose this information fight or war, and we would not lose actually our understanding and consciousness in the fight for the minds of the people who live today in the Crimea or in the temporarily occupied territories of Donbass. 6 months ago, approximately on June 29th, 2014, when we had a lengthy discussion to the effect that in Ukraine there is no single state information policy, and there is not a single body or organ which would convey the message or the idea of Kiev or the sort of Kiev to the international community and our partners in Europe and the United States and those people who live in the east of our country and in the Crimea. So this discussion actually prompted me to create some kind of to create some kind of directorate to the National Guards, and that we was mobilized this year to the National Guards. We set up that organ, and we had a discussion with our government and my colleagues in the National Guards about the experience to set up such an organization in the state. This discussion took place before the solemn oath taken by the new parliament, and actually this discussion again took place yesterday when we voted for the new government members, and if the discussion. Did we have a discussion? Well, let's first of all give a chance to Yuriy to finish his speech. Okay, I repeat myself. There was a discussion, and I once again repeat who was part of that discussion. In those days, we discussed that with the then government and my colleagues, which were involved in the information policy and security matters with the government headed by the Arseniy Yatsenyuk. With my colleagues, I'm talking for the third time with the National Guards and the Minister of Interior, including the Minister of Interior, Mr. Avakov. And this discussion actually took place for 6 months. That's exactly what I'm talking about now. I can present the discussion of the provisions about the major foundations or basis of these provisions. If you do not need that, we can straight go forward to the round table, which is actually our meeting is called round table, and my understanding is that through this discussion we have to somehow to come up with the vision how this Minister of Information Policy should be formed and work. Maybe Yuriy can outline with some of the sentences those provisions, since we are very much fresh, so to say, we just I've seen that a few minutes ago for the first time. Well, I can say that to create or set up such an organ or ministry, what prompted me to do something about that, I'm talking about the experience amassed by Great Britain and France, where similar ministries were set up during the First World War. And also they revived or they recreated their such ministries during the Second World War. And it is exactly the experience of those countries which actually showed to me how they can work. And same holds for the Israel experience, which prompted us major theses, 3 major ones. Over the time where the state of Ukraine has existed, there was no concept of the information strategy or policy in the state. It has never been translated to life. And that's why one of the department and one of the deputy ministers will be responsible for this specific issue, creating the strategy of information policy when introducing that in our country. The second department, which we are going to set up, is related to the geopolitical information war threats. First of all, the one which we are involved in and which was unleashed by the Russian Federation and from outside, so to say, among the lobbyists of the Russian Federation. And one more, and again, there will be several people who are going to work on coming up with the concept of the information security of the country. And the third department, accordingly, which I believe it would be necessary to create, is the, let's say, to create the communication with the different bodies and agencies in order to introduce and implement this strategy and conveying the messages which could bring the understanding in the world over and in Ukraine, including the executive agencies and the existing ministries or any other public bodies associated with the executive authority. This is a very brief description of that. Thank you very much, Yuriy. My esteemed colleagues, you're invited to take part in this discussion. Also, I would like to mention at this point of time that we invited more of our colleagues. Unfortunately, some of them are not today in Kyiv, but we thought we should not postpone this discussion, at least the beginning of this discussion, to some later day. That's why, unfortunately, maybe we are not represented here by all the groups which are associated with this subject matter. Again, not all of them are here today, at least. And I'm talking about those colleagues which have different points of view. Mustafa, Nayem, you have the floor. First of all, I would like to thank you, Yuriy, that you addressed the public and journalists, and between the journalists and politicians. Actually, we familiarized ourselves thoroughly with these provisions or regulations. I really read it very attentively. I have some of the questions regarding some of the provisions, but before I start that, I would like to ask you, this is the finalized copy of the regulations, or it's subject to some changes or amendments or later on? Well, I emphasized at the very beginning that this is draft regulations, which was actually designed or developed in 2007, 2008. If I had an opinion, this is a finalized version. Maybe we would just wouldn't have this kind of dialogue or debate with our partners, colleagues in Europe and the world over. Actually, I plan to organize such or arrange such discussion around tables by the end of this week with different people involved, including ambassadors of many countries, media managers, the trade union, Ukrainian tele and radio broadcasting companies, and mass media journalists speaking, etc., etc. Only after those discussions, we'll have to understand what provisions, what items could be, let's say, eliminated, taken away, because maybe not all of them actually correspond to the present time. And only when we do this kind of chores or this kind of work, I can propose this to the government of the parliament for their approval. Thank you very much for your openness, and it's perhaps this is the first time when the governmental people actually propose that for the honest and transparent discussion. But again, if you're talking about the journalists, there are some of the items which make provision for interference in the professional life of journalists. Such an item or such provision that the ministry has to develop and improve the standards of profession in the sphere of media and information. This is surprising. I'm talking, maybe I can name here the different items of provisions, and then you can talk about that. You know, Mustafa, since, first of all, since our colleagues or our audience and TV audiences, I believe they can see us in the live broadcast, and maybe they do not have this copy of regulations or draft regulations. So because this is the since one of the TV channels is broadcasting that, maybe we have to name the regulations. Yeah, maybe very briefly I'll take all those items. I'm sorry, Mustafa. I believe that a certain number of the provisions you're going to name, maybe they're going to be redundant. So it would be nice if you just name those and then we can discuss those. Okay, item 10. To develop in the, according to the established procedure, yeah, this number one, just the number 13 in the procedures actually provided by the cabinet of ministry, the information agencies. Number 14, register mass communication agencies. 19, to introduce different measures regarding the inflicting some damage or regarding the not high quality or improper information. Again, I can't understand how again to establish that. It is going to be associated with the state media, public media or not, and what kind of measures. Next one, 22. The sphere of media information. Is that a function of the state body or not? I'm not sure. 27. Within the powers to check the powers and authority of those persons who actually be like to take the office, the different office, public offices. I can understand what kind of verification we're talking about. And 34, appoints according to established procedure deputy directors or directors of the major mass communication agencies. This is what actually I found. What surprised me as a journalist. Maybe you can provide your explanations regarding that. Well, we can add to this very interesting item, Dmytro ensuring the observance of the freedom of ideas or thoughts. Item 26. Sergiy, you also would like to suggest something? Okay, Dmytro, one more point, very important to my understanding. If I properly read this draft law, and speaking about the duties, the procedure, the sphere of activities after a vote in Parliament must be approved within 3 days period of time. So how it coincides with the broad discussion or approval, I cannot understand that, how it can be possible. This is a question to Yuriy Stets, whether Yuriy knows this provision of the law. And can you provide your comments on that? Thank you, Dmytro. Maybe Sergiy. Sergiy Leschenko. Good afternoon, Sergiy Leschenko. I would like to thank the preceding coalition that they failed to approve this law or adopt this law. Otherwise, we would lose the Maidan. Because with this law, the revolution of dignity of 1314 would become possible. As regards the law, my question is to Yuriy. The draft law, one of the provisions, is the state registration of the printed media or the mass media communication means. What do you mean by that? The item 13, yeah, it has been mentioned already. Okay, we are going to give the floor to Yuriy for him to comment on that, on those things. Again, if there are some comments regarding the text, so please, again, speaking about the text, there is no such term as the mass communication means, and then item 3 regarding the supervision over the mass communication means, irrespective of their forms of ownership, this is the sentence 3 from the paragraph 3, irrespective of their subordination and forms of ownership. I'm really very much surprised what we are talking about, but one of the item is a fantastic one. How are we going to ensure the observance in Ukraine, the freedom of thought or ideas? Well, honestly speaking, it's really amazing that we are discussing those provisions. It's surprising that we are discussing the existence of the Ministry of Information Policy in 2014. It's really, and the fact that we are discussing this country with it being transmitted, etc., etc., we could talk about 150 different items of provision, very useful ones. But generally speaking, you are talking about the existence of those provisions or this. We are talking with one of our journalists in Israel. They have nothing like Ministry of Information or propaganda or something like that, and we just try to find what country had it. In Syria, for example, they had under Saddam Hussein rule. Maybe in some underdeveloped African countries, there was a kind of, this is some kind of the some negative which we should be ashamed of. We are talking about the budget. If this ministry is created just for one person, for the minister, for him to have some office, this is one thing. If the ministry is going to have all the different branches, all the regions, it means, huge money. And we are talking about the lack of money for pensions, payment of pensions, or the payments of the salaries and wages, and they do not have enough money to create the ammunition for the soldiers in the front. Thank you. Maybe we can actually extend the issue which has been voiced by Nastya. Your vision, what kind of budget you're going to have, and you are going to ask Ukraine for. Maybe you can see some of the resources or the sources where we can find that money. Maybe you have your visions, so how can do that? And maybe this is something we are going to discuss now. Maybe you have some visions where you can visualize some kind of specific achievements or attainments by the ministry within 1 month, half a year, 12 months, or whatever else, so that you could convince us that we are going to win this information war against the Russian Federation. We are going to be involved in that war in such a manner, or in this way. Regarding the such country as Israel and other countries. In Israel, in 1967, they set up the ministry which was called or titled Ministry of Information Diaspora in 1967, and it existed until 2013. Now, today, there are similar ministries. May I continue? Speaking about the ministries which deals with information policy and security in Israel, is called a ministry in the issues of Jerusalem and diaspora. And once again, until 2013, and it bore the title of Ministry of Information Diaspora of Israel. And this information that they do not have such a ministry in Israel is not true. Regarding those countries which you mentioned, yeah, they dealt with the information. I mentioned the name of that ministry. Also, I can enumerate here the items which are, let's say, redundant or similar in the regulations which I mentioned. As for the comparison with some countries you mentioned as well, again, at the very beginning I said that in those regulations I tried to include the functional of the countries, not those which were named here, but what was suggested and introduced in such countries as Great Britain, France, and the United States. At the time of the warfare, and do we have warfare or an anti-terrorist operation? Once again, I emphasize that in my decision to propose to the coalition, to factions, different factions, to the deputies and the Prime Minister of Ukraine to set up such a ministry, I actually I used the experience of Great Britain, France, and the United States, but not the countries you mentioned. As regards other, should I provide the answer to other of your questions? Or definitely. I put down a committee paper all the items, all the provisions, and all the issues or questions which you raise here, and then they'll try to answer all of them. Thank you. As regards
We asked all the questions. Why you, as a minister, why have not you told about that draft resolution? Why do you did everything possible for the decision that was passed, approved in the package? We are afraid of the reaction. Were you afraid that they would not vote for you? Why? What are the reasons? In this concrete case, the decision was approved not by Mr. Yuriy, but I can answer this. Let me try to answer to your questions. Lots of questions. Let me try to answer. As to the discussion about the ministry and the agenda in the parliament, that's the question to the agenda in the parliament. How the parliament was decided to vote. I have no influence on decisions of the speaker of the parliament. I can speak about the second part of your question about public discussion. We are here. We are here for a public discussion. Prerogative of deputies and factions and coalitions is to. I physically will not be able to answer all the questions. If we speak about public discussion, this is what is taking place now. If we speak about documents that guide MPs and also the agenda of Ukraine, they use laws and how to set up a coalition, cabinet of ministers and regulations of cabinet ministers or new ministries. As to the regulation, this is the draft. Paragraphs include my vision, and also the group that worked on this in 2007, 2009 or 10. And 41 paragraphs, they don't meet the legislation, and they should be taken out of this of this document. And I will comment all paragraphs. And paragraph 10. To develops and approves state standards of for TV production, standards of social advertisement, and all monitors compliance with these standards. Someone who asked this question, how did it sound, Mustafa? Paragraph 10, point 10, develops and approves. Your question, I don't understand. Okay. TV standards of production. Those who don't fit the standards, what do we do to them? I will add the most. I will speak more global standards. Or what? Standards is when we take paint, how it should. What components? Standard of social advertisement. How many of public servants should be involved? These are technical standards, and there should be special description. Paragraph 10, we speak about Ukrdержstandarд. Ukraine. Let's speak about this. I'll try to show my position, and then we could have a discussion. In Ukraine, we don't have any department or body that would work on according to the development strategy and introduced information policy of the country in the field of social advertisement. Every ministry, every department, every administration, any body of executive branch at their own discretion decide whether to distribute or not to distribute, publish or not, on outside, or to suggest to TV channels or radios or to other mass media whether to suggest them to put that social advertisement. Does the society need to know what the executive branch is doing? And half a year ago, and journalists who were here, they said, you said yes. because public discussion and information, including ministries in the country, it was under the question and by journalists, first of all. And I believe that with those reforms that will be introduced by the Cabinet of Ministers, informing the society, it's very important. Otherwise, the society will not agree with these reforms because the information, how it will be done, there will be no such information. There is no other way how to inform through briefings, TV shows, press conferences, and social advertisement. There is no other option. We waste time. Somehow you don't allow to ask questions. I'm happy with your history, with the story. Let him speak, and I will be shut up. That history that you told us about providing arguments for your ministry. I'm happy that you have not started to mention the Middle Ages and tortures during that times. Thank you very much. I agree with that such discussion should take place before this ministry is set up, not after. What's the point of discussion? It's an effort to use up power one more time and to use up information, because you know what you will do. The rating of the president is falling down. You would like to subject everyone. So, and first of all, I would like to work normally, and then I would try to subdue all mass media. Thank you. Dmytro, I have also comments. Just wait. Sergiy, we will come back. Emotions. We had enough of emotions, so let's come back to. Let's give a chance to Yuriy to answer. Dear colleagues, we have a discussion. It's like we live in two parallel worlds or dimensions. One of the general philosophical discussion whether we need a ministry or not, whether to swim in this lake or not. The other discussion is point 10, paragraph 10, and what we need to decide what is the subject of the discussion. Do we understand and professionally, and do we want to understand the definitions and abbreviations? So will we speak like philosophers? The second day after the Ministry of Information was set up, we will have a discussion about the role of the country in social process and also in this dimension and management of a social process. And one more point, Sergiy, with your permission, and the second point, very important, I don't see at this table any enemy. I don't see any enemy at this table. I see people who have a different opinion about the same issue. I see any reason for turning our discussion into emotions, into accusations. Let me about the Ministry of Israel, because Yuriy wanted to explain. There is no need to experience. They experience it existed for years, 2009, 2013, and the ministry turned into Ministry of Jerusalem and Diaspora. Before Ministry of Information, there was from 1967 to 1969, and the Ministry of Diaspora and Anti-Semitism but without the ministry, the main official role of that ministry was to be a speaker of the Israel government for the diaspora in the world. But this connection is guided by the Ministry of Economy as an additional work, and Israeli journalists are interested why we need such an institution which functions they have in other countries, and 15 people are on the staff and nobody knows what they are doing. Nastya, with your permission, I would like to turn it to constructive, to make it constructive. Let's ask Yuriy to respond to main questions. that were asked by all of you about the budget, for example, and maybe you will try in 3 minutes, try to answer in 3 minutes, and then I'll give the floor to Svitlana. A brief comment. We discuss the issue, what the ministry will do. If your comment is, I see this like this, and we don't need this, then I don't understand why we are here. You have to answer the questions. Mustafa, Nayem, Sergiy, Leschenko, they asked about paragraphs in the regulation in this document. I suggest that let's not use this time, which is very important. Let's stay here and discuss it with the help of. Then we'll inform the society through Romansky TV, through blogs, social networks. We can inform the society how about this discussion, and there will be more means for that. And if you want, if not, I have a suggestion. One comment. Inform us on the budget, because it's very important. May I say something?
We have the provision. I would like to hear your vision. What do you understand under mass communication means? Internet publications is falling under that or not? Is there to be introduced into register? Your vision of that, If I may, I would immediately answer the question of Sergiy and then return to those questions which I put down from Mustafa and Nastya. The provisions which were developed in 2007-8 was related to the public means of communication which existed in those days in Ukraine. Again, if you're talking about the changes or amendments to be introduced into the legislation, starting including those which start from January 1, next year, this item cannot be introduced into the provisions, since such a notion as the enactment regarding the communal. If we're talking about mass media subordination, I was one of the authors of the draft law who tried to submit it for the voting for the previous composition of the parliament. So I can say that this specific item is outdated, perhaps, and it should not be included in the provision. Not, we are talking about the internet publications of the country. You mentioned the register of the mass communication means. It is not related to the public broadcasting or the etization. What we are talking about, the mass media means, but not mass communication means. This is the difference in one word. Yeah. So my question is, does the regulation about the ministry make provision for introduction or registration of the internet media in Ukraine? This is a very simple question. The answer is no. Yeah, this will not be the case. Answer number 2, registration of the printed matter or the printed media or some other. This is a competence of the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice is going to deal with that further on. Once again, I emphasize, this is the draft decision or draft resolution regarding the propositions or the suggestions which you can hear. That proposals, the aim is to take them into consideration. If you're talking about the draft for 2007-2009, please take that into consideration just to save the time of the broadcasting. The Minister of Information, okay. Allow myself. Let's refrain. Okay. Well, I'm going to give the mic to Svitlana, but I would like to ask you, Yuriy, to concentrate on the question of Dmytro, when the budget can be formed, and then what kind of budget we are going to set. There's a question of Nastya. Very fast regarding the budget and the staff. My vision, what we were talking about the staff, the number of the deputies, number of departments, I have to emphasize that in the public budget, which is being formed for 2015, we are going to submit a proposal regarding the work in the funds which are going to be channeled for this or allocated for this ministry. I would like to mention that to note. I would like to know that the lines of the expenses which we had in the 2013, 14, etc., etc. Since I was a chairman of the committee for information, etc., etc., I could see that the expenses for the TV and radio broadcasting, newspapers, and the Voice of Ukraine and the government bulletin, and there are some of the publications like Vichy, etc. There are a lot of expenses which could be reduced manifold. As regards the budget, this means is going to be funded by the budget, both the salary of the employees. Not a single kopeck is going to be spent for the function of the ministry if you're talking about the introduction of the social advertisement of the production, whatever, on the involvement of freelancers or some other structures. Which I had in the department of the information policy and security. We are not going to do that. Now, not the vehicles or the premises which exist today or had existed in ministers. This will not be included in the draft provisions or regulations. The premises which we are discussing now in the cabinet ministers, maybe we can take some of the offices, existing offices of some of the ministers, and this will be sufficient. Not a single kopeck will be spent on some other rooms or premises for the Ministry of Information Policy. I mean, some extra funds will not be taken from state budget. Again, I'll mention that we are going to find the premises from the intake those from the existing ministries. Well, in other words, there will be some expenses, but they will be we are not talking about the extra expenses, but within the limitations of those funds which exist today in different ministers. Exactly. I would like to further specify one more thing about the budget and the terms. Yeah, I'm going to say that this ministry, the budget, will be tens, dozens of times less than those of the existing ministries. Sure, it must be there, the budget, because we are talking about salaries of the employees. But once again, emphasize that I have some experience in working in the specific agency for the National Guards, where we use the money from the sponsors, donors, and our partners from abroad. I'm going to use that experience of mine. The question regarding the need to introduce this within the 3 days term. Well, again, today at the meeting of the cabinet ministers, they mentioned that all the positions were related to function of all the ministries must be in line with existing legislation. This also holds for the Ministry of Information. How we're going to discuss the provisions? Okay, I have a question. Just a couple of words. Literally, the major reason why I, as a deputy of the Petro Poroshenko bloc faction, why I voted for this government was the setting up of the Ministry of Information, because the country demands from us to live a new life. And I believe that a small lie can give birth to a very big lack of confidence or trust. And actually, those provisions were developed back in 2008, and we are discussing on today. This is the first time I'm familiarized with myself with those provisions. This is my question number one. Number two, we had a talk. We actually discussed that those regulations or provisions has to be publicly discussed, but instead it was given immediately kind of discussion status. And many of those people who are involved have not seen those provisions before. They can understand whether it's good or not. We are not talking about that. We're just very blind now. And whether the country expected this from us, I have my doubts about that. What was the reason? Oh, okay, it's not in when I asked that question. Why a 3 days term? because this seems that we are going to talk here, fix something, register something, that, and we say that we had a broad discussion of that, and in 3 days we are going to introduce or those provisions as those been discussed. But we have to have some time to discuss that with the broad public at large, with the media. What I'm talking about, we are talking about the provisions which is enough understood that they have nothing with the subject or discussion. Yes, this contains very good provisions, etc., and proper provisions. Again, we are going to talk half an hour more. In 3 days, the ministry will start working, and all the journalists will be unanimous in criticizing that. And we would say that we'll have those funny consequences of all this, which is going to happen now. This is important, actually. Once again, I would like to emphasize, I believe that you know no less, no worse than I do. Yesterday we were not discussing the provisions or regulations of the minister, because this is the competence of the cabinet ministers, and this discussion has to go through the public at large. And again, I emphasize that at the very beginning of our discussion, we have to discuss this with our partners in Europe, and only after that I am going to submit those provisions or regulations to the cabinet ministers. What is the deadline for that? Not more than 2-3 days. Okay, let's move ahead, Natalia. We have 5 more persons. You have 2.5 minutes each of you. Esteemed colleagues, including Dmytro and Yuriy. We can talk a lot about the culture, how, generally speaking, the idea of creating the ministry was submitted, or we can speak a lot how it was adopted by the coalition. We can talk a lot about the procedure, violation of this procedure, etc., etc. But I'm not going to talk about that. I would like to come back to the very beginning, where I'm talking about the Minister of Information. Yuriy Stets actually raised 2 issues. Information war inside the country, information war outside or beyond the boundaries of this country. I believe that there are nobody here, or there is nobody who has doubt that those issues have to be resolved. But the proposed tool or instrument how to resolve this problem, I believe, unfortunately, to be inadequate. And I'll try to explain why. Based on the provisions which I read today, there is no vision how we are going to fight. At least it's not emphasized that there is no strategic understanding that this is the ministry which is going to fight in this information war against Russia. On the contrary, we are going to create a mega giant which is going to have all the functions of the mass media, in registration, creating infrastructure, creating the products, generally speaking. I was amazed to see that there are some separate functions regarding the information products creation. So the ministry is going to create that, yeah, or produce that. This is a big problem. I believe that we are living in the period when we are going to have those problems in place, and the tools and the instruments which we are going to create will not resolve those problems. Regarding the provisions or regulations proper, we have to very seriously revisit that, starting from the global violation of legislation. For example, I'm going to read out a specific item here. The information and it has to provide the information about the well, we actually found that we wrote that we are going to de-ethanization, let's say, or whatever is related to information, that we are going to leave out the supervision of the country on the mass media. Those provisions actually run counter to international standards regarding the logics or approval or development of freedom of speech in the country. It contradicts, this document, unfortunately. On the contrary, it creates the problems regarding the state regulation against which we will be fighting for the last 20 years. So speaking about the general provisions, we have to sit down in the kind of the closed room and to revisit, to rewrite this. And we have to involve everybody concerned here. Another point, budget. In France, me and Mustafa, we attended the first meeting of the cabinet ministers, and the prime minister mentioned 36 billion hryvnia deficit of the budget and 100 plus deficit for Naftogaz. That means that the allocation of new funds is not provided for, but it can be done. 53% of the expenses of the budget can be or have to be reduced by several, let's say, tenths of the percent. This is talking about the health care and some other things. To seriously speak about those about the surgeons, we can do that only with some specific figures. And since there was no calculation, no serious calculation, no serious discussion, this is a big problem because we do not have any information at all. And finally, I have a very constructive proposal. Sorry to have such a let's say bitter criticism. My suggestion is we have to start the process. I'm sure that we can agree with the minister that within a couple of days we can talk about the strategy, how we can answer those questions which were raised by Yuriy Stets very justly, very fairly about the information war, which actually requires a lot of efforts in the country. But at the same time, we have to create the instruments or the tools which will provide the adequate responses to those issues. You were right to say the state radio broadcasting system had to be cancelled or eliminated. We can too consult with Natalia Yuriy, the Minister of Finance, and we can ask her how we can regulate that. And we can approach the public at large with the mature thoughts how to do that. Thank you very much. Svitlana, again, I would like to propose that we should not forget that the foundation of the information security should be outlined by the new strategy of information security, which was outlined in the coalition agreement. And actually, I hope that we are going to find the tools and the instruments how to translate it into life. We understand here only too well, and the Ukraine Media Center, Cross Media Center, by its work proves that we understand that we are involved in the information war and all those things, you know.
Repchin Alexei, Batkivshchina. I am not a journalist or I'm not a media expert, but I feel that I have to speak because it's a very important event. And yesterday it forced me not to vote for cabinet of ministers and to react to those protests which took place. We spoke yesterday that Batkivshchina fraction. You answered to your questions. They were convincing, some of them. Some questions are still asked until now. There are 2 points: not understanding of the process, and also there are fears, censorship and orders. And you told that this is a reaction of journalists, and you created some safeguards. I'm not a journalist. I don't have such fears, but I don't understand the process. Why a very important thing for the public: information policy, information security, or maybe information of Ministry of Information Business Security. Nobody would call it Ministry of Truth. So we see that the issue is not solved. It's a very important issue when the President speaks about ministers, foreigners, and there is no time to react, to suggest, to prepare some draft laws. And now we don't have this. And post factum, we discuss what happened. Should there be a ministry or agency, or maybe functions of Security and Defense Council should be improved? Look, foreign journalists, they started to work from here. And why we need a minister? Nobody says that we don't need it. Maybe we need to discuss it. And the question: we create such a monster. I met you yesterday. All your colleagues who told me that you are a good person. There's some other people can run it tomorrow. I believe in that you have good goals, good purposes, and there were some rumors, and they wanted to liquidate the Ministry of Youth and Sport, or to cut its budget and to give it to you. Could you comment that? Because yesterday we voted for the ministry It's not that article of the budget we are discussing here. Thank you. Thank you for stopping discussion by paragraphs, because it's a philosophical discussion. I have no answer. What do we achieve when we set up such a body? What's the goal? What's the mission? What are the concrete results we must achieve? We should, for example, stop down Russian satellite signal. Should we brainwash people who live on liberated territories who still say that Channel 5 is lying, but Russian channels say the truth? What is the goal to achieve? Why we have problems that can be solved on the level of interagency communication, on the level of staff for Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example. Oksana Romaniuk is absent from here, but Poland, September meeting of OSCE. From Ukraine, there were 3 people. Me, Oksana Romaniuk, and Olga Rasenyuk, a member of on radio and TV broadcasting. That's it. From the other side, there were more than 15 different representatives, including TV channel Zvezda, etc., etc. The question is why even to such events, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, embassies, why didn't do anything? Why do we need to create set up new bodies when we have a lot of other bodies who are responsible for information security, and I mean cyber security first of all, in that context? When we have embassies, and you can read a lot of interesting things, how people are trying to get their passports. Maybe we should make them work in a new way instead of creating something new. We cannot create, we have some problems with legislation, and with the budget it will not allow us to develop. And public broadcasting, it's the base of everything. And so you wanted to stop public broadcasting because of the state interferes. That is a censorship, and that is prohibited by Article 15 of the Constitution. So the issue is open. What do you want to achieve? Whether we will fight against foreign aggression, then there should be a working group set up between interagency, which will work on liberated territories, and which will work on the territory of Russian Federation and Europe, and if they tell what is happening here. Otherwise, it is called censorship. The law on public broadcasting, it should be. It comes into force. It should be set up. It should come into force on January 1st. He speaks about public broadcasting, and Alazania is not in the country. He could not participate in our discussion.
Alexander Pavlichenko, thank you. Well, the Ministry for Information has existed in a certain form in 1996, and Sergiy Vasilyev was an informal minister. So at the moment, I would not recommend to go back to this formula. Secondly, the creation of such an institution as the Ministry for Information Policy is in principle non-understanding of the basics of human rights and the rule of law. And we will have to amend the Article 1st of the Ukrainian Constitution. I think this is a bad image step for the Ukrainian state on the international arena, and the case of the European Court, where they involved the freedom of thought and freedom of speech. I think everything is mixed up here in the document that we've been handed out. I think that the European Court will recognize the interference of the state here, and the platform of public organizations that I represent here that developed the so-called human rights agenda that provides for the decrease of the role of the state in the regulation of information sector, and the withdrawal from under the censorship from under the control of the state, of mass media, and the adequate existence of the freedom of speech in Ukraine. And the creation through the pressure of such an institution as the Ministry for Information Policy is a long, long step back. We are probably going back to the 1980s, where the institutions like these were becoming extinct on the European continent. We are restoring them. In this way, rejecting the progress of the European continent now. So I would stress what Svitlana Zalischuk suggested, to impose a moratorium on this decision, and even as far as the name of our today's round table is concerned, we we're supposed to talk about the directions of the work of the ministry, but we don't have the ministry so far. So we should raise the Hamlet's question, to be or not to be, because there are no representatives from expert milieu or from our foreign partners, the Council of Europe or public organizations. I think this should be what we should be talking about. We should look straight in the eyes of other people and of everybody and say our concept is maybe a losing concept. So I would suggest that we put a moratorium on this, get necessary tests and analysis, and see whether this is going to be really useful for our state. This process should be suspended, rethought, and only after this we will be able to say go ahead. Natalia Sokolenko, Public Radio and Stop Censorship. The entire story of creating the ministry reminds me of the creation of the National Commission on the issues of morale and our constant fight against this body. Our former Minister of Justice, Alexander Lavrinovich, there was a case when we thought along the same lines. He said that he supports the liquidation of this body because they didn't find the authority for themselves that other bodies would not have in its functions. For instance, point 32 suggested by Mr. Stets monitors the information on the mass media and sends notes to the president and other. But what will then the press services do and analytical departments of the Council for National Security and Defense, for instance? And Dunya Mijatovic, the representative of OSCE, says that this intention to create this ministry does endanger the freedom of mass media. So I think that we do not need a moratorium. We should just stop this process. This is normal. This is a European way, and Mr. Stets should go to the Security Service or the Council for National Defense and Security and create a corresponding department here. I am categorically against the creation of something that actually replicates what is already there. Tetiana, just two phrases. I wholeheartedly support whatever was said here, but if you want to conduct public hearings, then the law says that you have 30 days for this, and it cannot be conducted before the normative documents are published. If you want to do this without public hearings, then according to the law about the access to public information, there should be 20 days between the publication of a law and its coming into force. So this is not 2 or 3 days, but at least 20. As far as the constructive proposal of Svitlana to work on the document, then if you cross out everything that is replicated here, and you cross out everything that contradicts the law, then you would not have anything here. I have been a defender for Stets today. I understand very much what moves Mr. Yuriy. I understand that our state is very inefficient, and know that our state has not proven its efficiency in most of the spheres that it regulates, and even in those petty moments that the state could improve in the information sphere. And I think that this is the underlying factor for the desire to create this information ministry. But please, do not just nail him to the cross. Help the state to improve its work. Well, I think that there was a constructive proposal, and I think that Yuriy will now react. But why the liquidation of the ministry? I am against the suggestion that our proposal not to create the ministry is non-constructive. I think it is very constructive.
I'll try to answer your questions quickly, and I'll try to respond to two comments. First of all, you told that we needed to take a pause. We have a pause for 23 years. When we have these events in the east of Ukraine, we can wait for. We can have a pause for half a year, and every day I've called junta in the east of Ukraine in schools. When I set up a Department of Information Security, we're trying to improve the work of the TV channels and radio stations in the east. They will try to destroy publications of Malorussia and separatist those newspapers that they spread on our territories. And we're trying to arrest publications on occupied territories, but it was impossible to do it in the framework of National Guard's Security Department office. If we don't have those instruments, we will lose territory after the territory. If we don't start responding to information warfare, we lost it. We'll continue losing it. As to realistically, there were a lot of questions. Or if you don't need, I can stop. And it's important about the ministry and censorship in Ukraine. Under Yanukovych, he didn't need anybody to introduce censorship. I have understanding, and I told at the very beginning of this conversation that such a ministry using experience of the UK, the US, and France. We need it for the time of war, because the key task, or two tasks, to develop a strategy of information policy and the introduction of it, and to provide information security in the field of information warfare and from Russia. If we don't answer to those questions, we'll have no time for that. And the country is under the threat of destroyment. We don't need to repeat mistakes from 1918, and they didn't help Ukraine to survive. We can speak for hours about threats. Is there a threat that the military economy will be corruption? Probably there is a threat. Yeah, there are threats that information ministry can be a censorship body. Probably yes. But will it happen or not? That depends on the journalists, on the society, and on how policy of information ministry will be realized. And I can promise that such discussions on my position about this, I'm trying to stick to this position for 20 years. It's clear that this is ministry cannot influence on censorship, or it cannot threaten the freedom of speech in Ukraine. It's very important for public broadcast, and I had a discussion with Murabalazania, and there's a paragraph it's about public broadcast, and it's an old one, because there is the law on public broadcasting since January 1st. Probably this paragraph shouldn't be here. I gave this draft in the way it was in 2009, just to understand that it was developed, and there was an opportunity to introduce it many years ago. If that happened, we would not have Yanukovych in general. 51% in Mariupol voted for the oppositional bloc in Mariupol. I can say that the signal and separatists distribute their information much faster than official information from the government of Ukraine, even on liberated territories. You know, there is time when we can have a long discussion. There is a time to act, and the comment about if there is any violation of the Constitution, if it is introduced, this probably there will be such claims against this ministry, but there is no such a paragraph, and there will be no violation of the Constitution in the work of this ministry. We have to finish. We have the next briefing. It's great, but this document means that there could be violation of freedom of speech. I repeat again, this is a draft. This is a draft, and we are here just to discuss it and delete them. Why? We have for 8 months we have this situation. Why could it be? Why could Security Defense Council? Why don't they create a department? Why Ministry of Defense doesn't set up a security service? Doesn't create an information warfare department?
Sevil, I think that physically we don't have time to receive the answer to this issue, to this question. Sergiy, you had a question or what? Maybe you just reject this. We should now agree where we and when we do meet again. Can you answer us? Can you just not create this? The floor is. May I? Point one, Mr. Stets, if you're talking about war and the ministry that was there in Britain, they had an officially declared war. We don't have an officially declared war. And let's then remove this contradiction. If we have war, then let's declare it and create the propaganda ministry. If we don't have war, then this ministry inflicts damage on the reputation of the president and Ukraine. So my suggestion is that you can't put toothpaste back into the tube. My suggestion and proposal to you and your consciousness is you should reject this position or at least reformat it. Microphone. Microphone. Tell them to switch on the mic, please, someone. Yeah, here it does work. I'm sorry, this was not a public hearing, this was a round table, and that's why I think that Yuriy will now suggest what is the possible format of our cooperation, when and where we can meet him before this document, any document is endorsed about this conversation. Listen, if I have 2 minutes, no, we don't. 3 ministers, 10 seconds. Again, there are challenges. We have really lost our country in 1918, and the politicians there were responsible. If the media community is going to share the responsibility, I am ready to work together. Let's meet in 2 minutes and start working. I hope that you, at least through your Facebook page, will suggest where the public hearings can take place and maybe some work in a working group. Thank you.